Vagiga Khalsa, Vagiga for the ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of Media Watch. I'm your host, Dr. Savi. And as you know, every week we try and get together and look at the news across the world, and we also look at Sikh news as well. So it's really more about commentary, and we try and get wonderful guests with us. And this week we've got a really good guest. We have Vikram Grewal, all the way from Bloomberg, as well as other charity work that he does. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Dr. Savi.
Good to see you. And, you know, the format of the show is as per normal. Sometimes we have Shamsher Singh with us. He looks at Sikh history. We're not doing that this week. But we will be looking at three parts of the show. First of all, we'll be talking about a major headline. Follow that, we will be looking through the headlines of the week, just picking a few stories. And then we will be looking at a particular Sikh news that took place in Toronto. So we've got international flavour to that part of the show. So let's continue with the first part. The very sad news that we have literally hot off the press since yesterday about the awful tragedy over above the skies in Ukraine. Sadly, it's a situation where 295 people have lost their lives from many different countries, just like in the 9/11 situation where thousands of people died from all different nationalities. And it's so sad when it affects anyone to lose their life in such a tragic and, I would say, just an obnoxious manner, the way in which it's done. A civilian aircraft, people going away on holiday or going away on business. And I believe that there was 100 people who were major scientists and researchers into the AIDS situation, and they were on their way to a conference in Melbourne via their trip started in Amsterdam. They're on their way to Thailand, and they've lost their lives. So massive tragedies all the way around. We did see a conference recently from Malaysian Airlines, and had said that they are going to give some compensation as an interim payment, but nothing brings back the lives of people, and our hearts go out to all the people that have lost their lives. I wanted to ask you, Vikram, you know, there's a lot of toing and froing at the moment. What's your view on what's happening out there?
My view is that the toing and froing back and forth from Putin and the Ukraine, that's something that could easily be put to the side and avoided. The main issue of this tragic, horrific accident that took place was that 295 innocent people died for absolutely no reason of their own accord. And we need to get to the bottom of this with a succinct, independent investigation taken as soon as possible, and for the people that done this to put in front of court and prosecuted, because as it's a very tragic thing to see happen when innocent people are, and with so many of them going for a noble cause like an aid event, a conference, and it's a real shame to see. And it's great to see the international support with Prime Minister Cameron coming out, the Ukraine president, even the Dutch, who obviously had 2/3 of their nationalists on the plane that lost their lives, all calling for the same thing, for an independent investigation to take place and really come to the bottom of this tragic accident.
I think the black boxes have been recovered, but even that's a toing and froing situation at the moment as well. Are they being held somewhere and they're not being handed over because to expose what the real story is? I mean, that seems pretty weird, doesn't it?
Absolutely. The recent report suggests that the pro-Russian separatists within the Ukraine have actually taken the black box from the scene of the crime and taken it towards Russia. Obviously, that it's without a doubt that is a vital component in this, and also looking at the fragments of the rockets that hit the plane, and hopefully some fragments from the actual rockets being left behind and to be investigated so we can see who's really behind all this.
And I believe that initial report said there were hundreds of bodies scattered over quite a wide radius of the crash. And I think I saw some footage. There were like T-shirts and like "I love Amsterdam" and kind of people's bags, and it's kind of like these are pictures of their lives, isn't it? You know.
It's all that's left. And I know the $5,000 mentioned by the Malaysian Airlines chairman. It's something that's maybe a positive movement, but as you said, you can never put a monetary value on losing someone's life, and the loved ones of those 295 people will be absolutely distraught in the coming days.
Yeah, it's a horrific situation, and I just think that, you know, maybe just people just put their kind of differences aside and just focus in on, you know, why did it happen? How can we stop this happening again? Because obviously there is a no-fly zone above that area, and there were other airlines. I think that was one statement that was made, that there are other airlines that have been flying over that area. Just think about other conflict zones, you know, that has an impact on that too. The world is not safe. We should all just lay your arms down and talk about peace. But Let's move on to the next part of the show where we talk about a set of headline stories from around the world. I noticed that we're talking about sad situations between countries. The Israeli conflict that we see going on with the Gaza Strip, we see that there was a ceasefire that was signed. You know about that, right?
Yes, there was a ceasefire that was signed. A lot of rumours came about that that was the case, but after the actions from the Israeli army yesterday going into the Gaza region, that ceasefire obviously was not taken seriously, and now there's more of an aggressive approach from the Israeli army to go into Gaza and really go after the Assad Islamists that are there.
I think what they're saying is that thousands of troops have moved into parts of Gaza, backed by tanks and artillery fire. Hamas, the Palestinian group that controls Gaza, said that it will pay a high price for the invasion. So kind of like, there's lots of kind of, shouting that's going on between both. But if you look at the statistics as well, they say that 27 Palestinians, including a baby, 2 children and a 70-year-old woman have been killed since the Israeli poured ground forces into a densely populated strip of 1.8 million Palestinians. So what's actually happening is that there's bombing going on in civilian areas. This is not a situation where we see that, there's been X number on one side and X number on another. Any innocent life is a disaster for their family and the ripple effect that it has. But, I think that I can't understand why someone would sign a ceasefire and then go straight into, are they doing this because they've got tunnels there that they're trying to get access to?
Absolutely.
And blow up?
That's been the main focus from the Israeli Prime Minister, that there are these tunnels, that he's aware of that, are dangerous to the whole of Israel, where the Hamas individuals are going under and causing danger and passing by certain regions. So that's their main reason for it, going into the Gaza region. But as you said, any innocent life, regardless to what their religion is or what their caste is a tragedy. And I feel the media really needs to bring the initiative forward of not just mentioning, not being so pro-Israeli, and also.
Do you think it is?
Without a shadow of a doubt.
Yeah, what evidence have you got for that? Is that general news outlets that you look at, or do you just kind of see that not all the information is presented?
Well, I definitely do not condone the behaviour of the individuals within the Gaza zone, but at the same time, I believe that all we hear about is the Islamist extremists there and them firing rockets, but every action has a reaction, and there has to be rockets coming from the Israeli side as well. And we always hear of the death toll being significantly higher on the Palestinian side, with for example, 27 or 28 people have died recently since yesterday, and only 1 Israeli soldier has died. I'm not saying it should be equal proportion, but this is a tragedy.
No one's saying that.
Yeah, absolutely. And there has innocent children, a 5-month-old child. Why should they die over all this?
Yeah. And
why is civilian areas being bombed? There's been no justification.
I guess they might argue that, meaning the side that's doing the bombing, is that certain people might be hiding inside the civilian zone, so therefore it's kind of like a casualty of war. First of all, I completely hate that statement, because any death of any person is terrible, but that might be their statement to justify going into those zones. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's very rough for the whole situation, isn't it?
It is, and you have to. I believe even with previous wars, the thorough investigation maybe not taken forward before the war took place, and I believe there is a need for international pressure to make a ceasefire be signed and for initiative of peace being promoted, which I'm sorry, but the media have neglected. All you hear is about the attacks, but we need the UK government, the US, the big players within the UN to come forward and just really try and bring initiative of peace and force that ceasefire to be signed, because the longer this goes on, the more ugly it will get and the more lives that will be lost, and especially if it's of innocent civilians, that's a real tragedy for the whole world.
It's interesting you mentioned that point about, because if we go back to the previous item that we were talking about, and I saw a news item recently talking about the fact that possibly other countries that may not have actually said anything against Russia or Ukraine in the UN, India and China, may decide to kind of move their position or actually be more vocal. It just seems that the same countries come forward again and again to talk about things. It's the same country, for example, Egypt, that is trying to broker a deal. And I do like your point about the fact that we don't get to hear a lot about the peace talks that are going on. Would it not be a better story to talk about what the construct of that peace agreement actually is, if there is one, or maybe we should do it as a crowdsourcing thing, just like the world population contributes to how would you solve this problem, and you put it up on a website, and all these people write in and say, well, you could do it this way, you could do it that way. Greater minds coming together to solve a problem, rather than two people that keep kind of coming back to the, or two groups of individuals that come back to the table and not actually move it forward.
Absolutely, I believe we've come to a point in time where media, the routes for media are so vast now. Absolutely anything can become viral overnight. And the need for transparency is what you were hinting with all the words, was that's absolutely crucial. And if there are these meetings coming forward and the initiative being put forward, like for example the UN Security Council are attempting to create an emergency meeting to get to the bottom of this crisis that happened with obviously the aeroplane going down. We need more initiatives like this to go forward and people to be made accountable for what they're doing. And from a global point of view, we need the leaders of huge nations like India, China, USA, UK, for example, to really speak out against wrongdoings, regardless to who does them, even if it's against one another, because everyone can be accountable for what they've done.
Yeah, and I think the irony behind social media is that people make a lot of noise. When you look at a timeline on Twitter, people say if they can't understand what the timeline says, it's noise.
Yeah.
You can't seem to get through what the main bits of information are. Obviously, you've got to choose your followers and your people that you follow carefully. But I just wonder if the irony behind social media is that we tend to have a situation where we will continue to talk about what the news are bringing us and repeating it in like a retweeting stuff or talking about it on Facebook. But we as individuals don't come forward using social media as a way of saying, this is a way that you could solve it. Yeah. Rather than saying, oh, this is not good, we shouldn't do this, which we should do as well, we say, this is not good, we shouldn't do this. But by the way, what if we did it this way? What have they thought about this? And I reckon that maybe because society is so pushed in terms of its time, we don't get time to react in a positive, kind of educated, solution-orientated way. We just get to go, well, that's a really bad thing. That shouldn't happen.
Yeah, I completely agree with what you've said. For example, with Twitter, retweeting is obviously a great way to awareness, but to go that further and articulate yourself in a real productive manner would be to voice an opinion and not just mention the problem, but find a solution. And once you do that, you really get to the crux of the problem. And as you said, with many great minds thinking together, we can hopefully achieve peace and the outcome that everyone wants, instead of one or two minds that may potentially miss one or two things. Yeah,
maybe we should set up a website that just kind of manages that.
Exactly.
Talk about stuff rather than don't talk about stuff, but talk about solutions as well.
Exactly.
Okay, so talking about other stuff, one of the other items in the news was the UK, and you can kind of identify with this with all your financial brain that you have,
sure.
Your super duper financial brain. I think the headline here is something like the UK mortgage lending figures are the highest for 8 months. And I know that the Governor of England did do something recently by putting a cap on, but I think the figures state for themselves, don't they? They say that the amount of money borrowed reached 17.5 billion in June, which is 4% higher than the same period last year. And the amount of money left for borrowers to buy properties was the highest for 8 months in June, according to the mortgage lending figures from the banks and building societies. Do you think there's going to be a meltdown? I know we're in a hot climate. I know we've had really hot temperatures in the UK, especially, of getting close to 30 degrees. Sure. Sorry to use that pun. Is there a meltdown? Is the bubble going to burst?
I fear that it may, purely because I believe this Help to Buy scheme, the cap on it was way above the normal limit of in the region of 600,000. An ordinary individual would not buy a property of that amount. So the Help to Buy scheme for first-time buyers, it was a brilliant idea, but I don't believe it was executed in the most productive and efficient manner.
But that's only what, do you think that is the reason that the increase is being fueled by that, do you think?
I believe it's a huge driving force behind it. Will it be sustained? I don't believe so. I don't believe properties are valued at what they are at the rate that they're going. Okay. And as you said, it's 70.5 billion. It's 7% higher than June last year. And we haven't seen this high as the monthly figure of gross mortgage lending since October 2013.
Yeah, exactly.
So that's quite worrying. But I do believe with these more stringent rules that are coming into place that Mark Carney touched on, and also the inevitable rise of the base rate of interest, these figures will not be as glamorous as they are right now.
We do also see that the gross mortgage lending for the second quarter of this year was up by 10%. Okay, so it's slightly different. This is kind of gross mortgage, but also for the first 3 months of the year, and this is the CML, have said that it's increased by 21% in the second quarter of 2013. So pretty big last year, pretty big this year as well, right? So that suggests that there's a lot of money in the system. There's a lot of property still being exchanged in terms of, but then what is the profile? What's the demographic of people? It's not first-time buyers, is it?
It's
not. Big property people that are buying stuff, and you know, are there people that have got a lot of property portfolios?
I would say it's definitely not first-time buyers that are driving this huge surge, and I would also say it's very regional in terms of it's a very London-led housing boom, which is also very worrying because obviously being London being the main centre point of the UK, but we often get in a cocoon. But the UK is a vast area, and every single region has its own demographics and economic significance. And we would really, I believe, to sustain this kind of growth and prosperity within the country that's only recently come about, the only way to do that would be to spread this amongst the whole country and not just in London.
So what's your view? I mean, I don't know how much in your own work that you do internationally, though, but what's the kind of reflection of what's happening in the UK compared to what's happening in Canada or over in the US? We're talking Western economies more than anything else. Do you think there's always talk that there's a lot of Chinese money in the system? Do you think that there's a similar situation in those kind of other regions?
Well, I believe there's a lot of Chinese money in the US.
Right.
They've bought the dollar at a vast rate and their reserves, there's no question about that. But in terms of London, there's a huge influx of international money into the property market in London. We've seen that there's more foreign investors.
So that makes that go up, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It gives it a huge boost, artificial boost in the sense that people that do not reside in the country for 12 months and that do not live here are boosting the economy, which may make it look like a beautiful picture, but it may not be that in reality. And what we've all seen in central London, there's a lot of holiday homes, people from Russia, China, India, so forth, have put all their money in there, as the London housing market is a safe haven. And during turbulent economic times, it makes sense to put the money there. But it makes it harder for people that live here. And I believe the numbers are very promising. The perception from the IMF has changed a bit on the UK economy because the austerity cuts were very severe. It was a very brave decision by Chancellor Osborne and the Conservative-led coalition government to do it.
Or maybe they're just lucky.
Maybe. I believe it's come at a great time from a political point of view. It's come at a great time with all these promising figures about the economy, about employment, about the housing boom as the election's coming next year, to almost prove that all these years of austerity cuts by Osborne, by the Conservative-led government, is justified. But I would say that it was still, policies like the bedroom tax and so forth were completely unnecessary.
But if you look at, for example, the figures last week that were actually this week that were produced, we talk about the week in retrospective. Sure. We talk about the fact that the public sector have not really had a great pay increase. You know, it's like in the 0.4% or something. Even in the private economies, you only see very rare situation where there might be a 7% increase in someone's salary, depending on the job, depending on who they are, depending on what sector they're in. Obviously, that is all combined. But on the whole, I know the teachers were on strike as well last week. Public sector workers are definitely, there's issues there, isn't there?
Yes, I believe they're hugely undervalued in terms of the remuneration that they get and the way they're seen in society. I believe doctors should be earning a lot more, teachers in particular, and the fact that they went on strike, it was a real shame for this government. And Michael Gove in particular, because they lost a lot of trust from him. He was the education minister at the time.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned the Michael Gove thing, because I was going to ask you about this week. There was also a massive reshuffle in the UK we're talking about with the existing incumbent parties, we should say, which is the Conservative Party and the Liberal Party that have a coalition, yeah? An alliance, whatever.
Happy family situation.
What, sorry?
Happy family.
A happy family situation. They like to think they're in a happy family. But was it really a happy family? Because they ended up, meaning the seniors, must have sat together and said, actually, we need to do a reorganisation. Do you think this reorganisation, and a lot of ministers have changed, in Sikhs, and we talk a lot about the equality, do you think there is an equal, he brought in more women to reflect that he's got a changing way? I'm talking about David Cameron in the future. that is a cabinet to go to the election with, because it's less than a year, well, actually a lot less than a year, as we kind of approach the campaign trail for election day in May 2015. Yep. Is this kind of a positioning for that?
Absolutely, without question. Prime Minister Cameron also mentioned it in Prime Minister's Questions this week, that he's brought a cabinet forward to reflect modern Britain more, which I interpreted as getting rid of his Etonian friends that might have been more traditional.
But George Osborne is also Etonian as well.
Absolutely, yeah. Which he also stayed in his position as Chancellor.
They're not all gone then?
No, they're not all gone. A few are, but there's still a long way to go in terms of equality, and Sikhism was probably one of the only religions that really speaks about equality and shows it in the structure of the Gurdwara and so forth. And equality in my eyes is 50-50. And what we've seen in this cabinet reshuffle is that there's still 75% men and 20, obviously one.
Not the same for Labour though, is it?
No, for Labour the shadow cabinet has always been 50-50, right. And the Labour Party's also had all women shortlists in more safer seats to really boost the number of female MPs within the Labour Party, and it's a great initiative which has seen the Labour Party have the most female MPs in it.
Right.
And a prime example is seeing also it's shaped for a Conservative majority government in the sense that Michael Gove has become the least popular politician in this country, and he was obviously demoted to Chief Whip by Prime Minister Cameron. Okay,
so that also can be, and we talk about politics, sometimes it's just an interim thing so that people just sit in the sidelines for a while, then they come back in again when they've actually successfully made it back into the majority or minority. Because one of the headlines this week spoke about the fact that maybe David Cameron was preparing for a minority government. Now, whether or not it's acceptable or not is another question, but anyone who'd want power would take it, wouldn't they?
They would. I believe Prime Minister Cameron has mentioned that he's going for a full-on majority, which I believe Ed Miliband is also going for.
And you've got to have good hopes.
You have to. You have to aim and aspire for the best,
right.
And then see what you're left with after the election. I'll be very surprised if there is a Conservative majority government after the election, but I believe the cabinet is most definitely shuffled to represent that and for that election.
Okay, and your indication of that is only because why? I mean, the economy's improving, apart from the point I made about, pay and stuff, do you think people will feel that, because I know also sometimes that certain subjects are used to scare the population as well, whether it be security or, in terms of like the home security that we have in the UK or whatever. And I think we've seen this in the past with other political parties do a bit of scaremongering to try and say, well, you don't want to change the system because we've got a security policy that works. I wonder if that will have a part to play too.
I believe it will. And in terms of what you mentioned about prosperity, we've seen that since 2010, average household income has gone down by 1,600, that's the truth of the matter.
Yeah.
These figures may talk about real wages only recently going up, but we have seen that there is a cost of living crisis, and for that average person in this country, it's been a very hard time.
It's an excellent point because, ultimately when you look at, who's on the poverty line or actually making sure that the benefit system actually works and it's going to the right people and, you're not kind of, there's a term that's been used recently called, it's kind of porn of poverty-stricken situations where people are actually making documentaries and they say, oh, isn't it bad that this person hasn't got any, it's kind of like a very kind of a horrible way of looking at a situation, say, oh, look, that person's really poor and getting pleasure out of it, when it's really, you should be looking at a situation saying, this is really bad, we need to do something about it. And there's some fantastic organizations, we know about SWAT that do loads of work out there, and they're homegrown, CASA Aid, people like that are homegrown organizations that do work out there. We're coming up to the end. We've got about 5 minutes left. We were talking about finance quite a lot. But It was interesting, I noted that in the Toronto Stock Exchange, we had Raja Singh Tully and Suneet Singh Tully, President and CEO, the latter, of a company called Data Wind Management. And I think they are a kind of an infrastructure type company. I'm sure someone will write in and say, no, they do this in technology or whatever. But anyway, they're technology orientated and they have been very successful. They've gone for an IPO and they opened the Toronto Stock Exchange. Be careful how you say Toronto. Does somebody say Toronto or Toronto? They opened the stock exchange, which is quite nice. And there's some photographs which show that you had a couple of Sikh people out there. I wanted to ask you, do you think that living in the UK, you're born in the UK, we're born in the UK, we're second generation in, and do you think we have the same kind of opportunities that people have in the US or in Canada? Or do you think those, I mean, I see that there's a Sikh politician in Canada. You see that there are various Sikhs that are making it into Republican seats over in the US. You know, we have, you know, a couple of Sikh guys opening the stock exchange. Do you think that kind of thing is happening here? Whereas, weirdly, Sikhs have been here longer than in those countries. Or maybe just as long, because I think if you look, I mean, even the stamp that we spoke about recently, about the Catamaru incident over in Vancouver, and that's 100 years, yeah, it's 1914, isn't it? We have a heritage of Maharaja Dalip Singh. All these years later, do we have the same opportunities? What's your view?
My view, firstly, is that that was a very proud moment for all Sikhs around the world when a Sikh gentleman rung in the bell at the Toronto Stock Exchange. I believe that there is an initiative needed for a more representation of Sikhs within politics, within the UK, and I believe there is an initiative that needs to be put into place, because whenever you see a politician, you want to see a bit of you in them, and for them to represent you. It's
a reflection of society?
Reflection of modern Britain.
Do you think media is a reflection of society? I know we do this program, we do Media Watch, we do it on Sikh Channel. Do you think that the general, you know, just because you see a brown person reading the news is a reflection of society?
Not necessarily. They have to be the right person. You can't just put anyone in there.
What about if somebody else has given them a script to read out? So, I mean...
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, there needs to be a right person that's opinionated, articulate, and also there for their own merit, not necessarily because they have a certain skin colour or meet a certain criteria. And I believe that Toronto in the US, in Canada in the US, sorry, there's a great initiative, and you do see a lot of ethnic minorities progressing well in politics, and I believe there is a need to increase that here.
Okay, I agree with that. And well, you know, if you have the potential and you want to do stuff, you should go out there and, you know, grab hold of that opportunity and go for it. Well, sadly, we come to the end of the show. It was been wonderful having you on the show. Please do come again. Brilliant financial knowledge, brilliant awareness of what's happening internationally. Well, thank you so much for that. And we will definitely have you back, and we will talk about a whole bunch of things again. And this time around, in terms of the bunch of things that we spoke about obviously the Toronto situation, which is brilliant. We've got a couple of Sikh people who, CEO, CTO, who opened up the stock exchange. We were talking about the sad situation over in the headline that we started off with. It's sad all the way around, isn't it? Yes. You know, we've been talking about a Malaysian incident, which is just awful that, you know, all those lives have lost. And then we talk about all the lives and innocent lives that get lost on either side of the border, whether it be on the Gaza side or whether it be on the Israeli side. You know, we want to give peace a chance. And we spoke about, hey, this idea that we've got, you know, why doesn't the world get together and contribute to negotiating peace rather than relying on certain people in certain closed rooms? I'm sure all of us together can come up with better suggestions, or suggestions that can enhance thoughts that are already there, bearing in mind the historical context of what people want and what they can have to sustain peace going forward. So until next time, thanks a lot for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you again. Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh.